The doctors have always told my mom that I have something called dissociative hallucinations. They think that just because I'm a little girl, I don't know what that means. But I do. It means they think I'm crazy. Adults all think that just because they can't see something, that means it isn't real. But the truth is that the things I see are just as real as what they see. Maybe even more real. That's because when I look at people, I see what they look like on the inside. I don't mean that I see their organs and bones and stuff. I mean that I see who they really are. A kind-hearted old woman looks like a radiant angel to me, and a vacuous supermodel like someone suffering from an unfortunate birth defect. When I look at pictures in my school textbooks of notorious dictators or criminals throughout history, all I can see are bloated corpses with worms poking out of holes in their rotted flesh. So when our new neighbor moved in, his head caved in, and maggots nesting in his brain, I knew that he was not to be trusted. He came by the afternoon he moved in to introduce himself. "My name's Jim," he said, extending a hand to my mother and grinning. I gagged as black pus oozed out of the lines in his cheeks. "Oh, it's nice to meet you," my mom said. "I was wondering who had moved in across the street." Jim crouched down so that his rotted face was at eye level with me. "And what's your name, little girl?" he said, grinning even wider and sticking his hand out at me. I didn't say anything. "Oh, Annie, you're being so rude," my mom said. "Sorry, Jim, she's a bit shy." "Well, that's okay," Jim said, eyeing me up and down. "I'm sure she'll grow out of that soon." He placed his hands on his knees and pushed himself back to his feet. "I've got a daughter her age too," he said. "And you ought to come visit for a sleepover sometime. I'd love for little Lucy to have some friends in the neighborhood." "Oh, that sounds like a great idea," my mom said. "How about we set one up this weekend?" "Sounds good to me," Jim said. "Well, I've got some errands to run, so I'll see you later, neighbor." He gave my mother a cheerful grin and looked at me one last time before he left. I looked up to my mom as soon as she shut the door. "That man's a bad man," I said. My mom sighed. "Don't be silly, Annie." She paused, then added nervously, "You're not seeing things again, are you?" "No, Mom." I'd long since learned not to answer that question honestly. That weekend, I met Lucy. She was a pleasant girl and pretty despite a few scars. Most children are pure-hearted and blemish-free, so I was surprised to see the scars, but they didn't bother me. The sleepover came and went without event, the only weird part being that Mr. Avery made us sit on his lap so he could read us a story. The weekend sleepovers continued after that, and although I liked Lucy a lot, I always felt a bit uneasy at her house. At first, it was just the walking corpse of her father that set me on edge. But then I noticed that every time I visited, Lucy would have at least one more scar. The longer I went, the more she began to resemble her dad, her flesh slowly becoming a ragged patchwork of scars and bruises, her eyes seething with quiet rage. The day that things came to a head was just a normal sleepover like any other, until Lucy's father came home, clothes askew and smelling like the bottle of rubbing alcohol my mother kept under the kitchen sink. He barged into Lucy's room, interrupting our game of truth or dare, and seizing Lucy by the arm, bending down to whisper something in her ear. As Lucy listened, her eyes widened to the size of milk saucers, and a terrified look seized over the patchwork of scars that made up her face. "You can't," she mumbled out. "Annie's here." Mr. Avery's grip tightened around his daughter's arm until his knuckles were white, and the whispering grew into a hiss. Her shoulders slumped, and her whole body seemed to go limp with resignation. And then, something horrible happened. As Mr. Avery whispered in his daughter's ear, the skin on her face began to stretch, pulling apart down the middle like a cloth tearing at the seams. Black pus slowly oozing down from the wound. A new scar was being formed. I knew I couldn't just stand by and watch, and so I screamed the first thing that popped into my head. "I know what you are!" The word sounded stupid coming out of my mouth, but Mr. Avery's jaw dropped a bit, and his grip around Lucy's arm slackened. "You what?" he said, seemingly dumbfounded that a stranger's child had just yelled at him. "I know what you are," I said. "You're a monster, and you're hurting her. I won't let you do it anymore." Mr. Avery let go of Lucy's arm and stood up straight as a rail. His startledness had turned to anger, and his eyes narrowed into slits. "I will not have my parenting questioned by a child," he said through clenched teeth. "You get out of my house right now, and don't you ever come back." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to grab Lucy by the arm and run away with her. But the sight of that disfigured monster rooted my feet to the ground. And then, like a coward, I turned tail and ran. I got grounded for 2 weeks for my disrespect to Lucy's father. And the next time I saw Lucy around the neighborhood, she was covered in so many scars that she was unrecognizable. I only knew it was her by her clothes and her ragged denim backpack with drawings all over it. As I saw Lucy becoming more and more disfigured, a boiling rage began to seethe inside my heart. That man had taken my friend from me. He had taken away her happiness, and nobody around me seemed to care. The more I thought about it, the more hateful I grew. And before long, ugly red scars began to rip their way through my face. I knew I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him get away with whatever he was doing to hurt my friend. I couldn't let him keep hurting her. So I hatched a plan. One day, when my parents were working late, I snuck into my dad's closet and opened his safe. I knew the combination was my parents' anniversary. Inside, I found what I was looking for. My father's antique Colt .45 revolver in the cardboard box of ammo. I loaded the gun and wrapped it up in grocery bags so nobody would see what it was. Then, I walked across the street to Lucy's house. I rang the doorbell, and as I stood on the porch, a panicked thought suddenly rushed through my head. What if someone else opened the door? What would I do? What would I say? My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I heard footsteps approach from the other side. The knob turned. My mouth went dry, and the gun seemed to grow heavier in my grip. The door opened, and there stood Mr. Avery, mouth slightly agape. His expression quickly turned to anger. "I thought I told you that you weren't..." Bang. The gunshot shattered the peaceful air of the quiet suburban neighborhood, and Mr. Avery stumbled back, clutching his bleeding stomach. I hit the ground as the gun kicked me back, ears ringing from the shot. I struggled back to my feet as the world span and blood rushed into my head. Bang. The air shattered again, and Mr. Avery fell down, and he didn't get back up. The ground beneath me spanned so fast, I felt as if I would fall off the earth. And then, I felt myself falling, and all I saw was darkness. I woke up in the hospital 2 weeks later. The doctors said I'd hit my head on the pavement when the gun kicked back, and slipped into a coma when I got to the hospital. In the 2 weeks that I was out, girls in the neighborhood had come out about horrible things that had happened at Mr. Avery's sleepovers. The adults assumed he'd done the same to me, and they told me that the DA had declined to press charges against me. To this day, I still know that what I did that day wasn't justice. It wasn't right. But I also know something else. I know that every time I saw Lucy after that, she had at least one less scar. And that's good enough for me. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, high quality MP3 downloads of my narrations, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.